In the mists of ancient Britain, where Celtic tribes roamed vast forests and rolling hills, a story began that would reshape the very foundations of civilization on this island. Long before the great metropolis we know today stretched across the Thames, before the towers of glass and steel reached toward the sky, there existed only marshland, scattered settlements, and the dreams of ambitious men who would dare to build an empire. The land itself seemed to breathe with ancient magic, where druids conducted sacred rituals in oak groves and warriors painted their faces with wood before battle, following traditions that stretched back beyond memory into the realm of legend. The year was 43 Anno Domini when Emperor Claudius made a decision that would echo through 2 millennia of history. Unlike his predecessor Julius Caesar, who had merely tested British waters with brief invasions nearly a century earlier, Claudius committed Rome's full military might to the conquest of this mysterious island beyond the northern seas. The emperor himself, often dismissed by his contemporaries as weak and scholarly, understood that Britain represented more than just another province to be added to the imperial map. It was a symbol of Roman power, extending to the very edges of the known world, a demonstration that no land, however distant or forbidding, could resist the eagles of Rome. 4 legions, nearly 40,000 seasoned warriors, crossed the treacherous waters of the Channel under the command of Aulus Plautius, carrying with them not just weapons and armor, but the blueprints of Roman civilization itself. These were not mere soldiers but engineers of empire, men who had built roads through alpine passes, constructed aqueducts across Spanish valleys, and established cities in the deserts of North Africa. Each legion carried within its ranks architects and surveyors, engineers and administrators, craftsmen and merchants who would transform the landscape they conquered as thoroughly as the military commanders who led them. The crossing itself was a marvel of Roman military organization. Hundreds of ships, from massive grain transports requisitioned from Mediterranean merchants to purpose-built military vessels designed for amphibious assault, carried the invasion force across waters that had protected Britain from continental interference for centuries. The logistics of moving 40,000 men, along with their equipment, supplies, and the materials needed to establish permanent bases, required months of careful planning and represented one of the largest military operations Rome had ever undertaken beyond the Mediterranean basin. The Celtic tribes of southeastern Britain, led by Caradocus and Togodumnus, sons of the deceased King Cunobelinus, mounted fierce resistance against these foreign invaders. These were not primitive barbarians as Roman propaganda would later claim, but sophisticated warriors who had traded with continental Europe for generations and understood both Roman military tactics and the implications of Roman conquest. Their resistance was coordinated and intelligent, utilizing the dense forests and marshlands of southeastern Britain to maximum advantage while attempting to forge alliances with tribes throughout the island. Yet Roman military engineering and discipline proved superior to Celtic courage and fury. The legions advanced methodically inland, establishing fortified camps according to standardized designs that had been perfected through centuries of conquest. Each night, regardless of the tactical situation, Roman soldiers constructed temporary fortifications that could withstand assault and provide secure bases for continued advance. These camps, built and abandoned as the army moved forward, left scars across the British landscape that archaeologists still discover today, silent testimony to the systematic nature of Roman conquest. The legions secured river crossings with the methodical precision that had conquered half the known world, building temporary bridges that could support heavy equipment and establishing permanent fords that would serve Roman logistics for generations. Roman engineers, trained in the construction techniques that had created the infrastructure of the Mediterranean world, immediately began adapting their methods to British conditions, learning to work with local materials and climate while maintaining the standards that made Roman engineering legendary. It was during this systematic advance that Roman scouts discovered a remarkable geographical feature that would determine the fate of an entire civilization. Where the great river Thames narrowed sufficiently for crossing, yet remained deep enough for seagoing vessels to navigate upstream, lay the perfect location for a strategic settlement. The river here wound through marshlands that provided natural defense while offering access to the interior of the island through tributaries that reached deep into Celtic territory. The tidal nature of the Thames meant that ships could ride the incoming tide upstream and use the outgoing tide to carry them back to the sea, making this location ideal for both military and commercial purposes. Here, Celtic tribes had long maintained a modest trading post, taking advantage of the natural ford that allowed travelers to cross the river at low tide. Archaeological evidence suggests that this crossing point had been in use for centuries before the Romans arrived, with Celtic merchants using it to trade goods between the tribes north and south of the Thames. The settlement was small and temporary, consisting mainly of seasonal market stalls and simple shelters for travelers, but it demonstrated the strategic importance of this location for anyone seeking to control movement across southeastern Britain. The Romans, with their genius for urban planning and strategic thinking, immediately recognized the immense potential of this location. Not only did it control the primary river crossing for miles in either direction, but it also commanded access to the Thames estuary, providing a direct water route to the continent and the heart of the Roman Empire. Roman military doctrine emphasized the importance of controlling river crossings and natural harbors, and this site offered both advantages in a single location that seemed designed by the gods themselves for the establishment of a great city. Within months of establishing their initial military camp, Roman engineers began surveying and planning what would become Londinium. The site chosen for the permanent settlement demonstrated the Roman ability to think in terms of centuries rather than years, selecting ground that would provide room for expansion while offering natural defenses and access to transportation routes. The surveyors, using instruments and techniques developed through generations of Roman urban planning, laid out a city grid that would accommodate not just immediate military needs, but the commercial and administrative requirements of a major provincial center. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Where once stood simple Celtic roundhouses and temporary market stalls, Roman architects and engineers began constructing a proper city according to classical principles that had been refined through the building of hundreds of cities across the empire. They laid out streets in the familiar grid pattern that characterized Roman urban planning throughout the empire, with the main thoroughfares running east to west and north to south, intersecting at right angles to create orderly blocks for development. This systematic approach to city planning, revolutionary in Britain though commonplace throughout the Roman world, would influence urban development in London for the next 2,000 years. The street layout reflected not just practical considerations but Roman ideas about civilization and order. The main streets were wide enough to accommodate military formations and heavy commercial traffic, while secondary streets provided access to residential and workshop areas. The grid system allowed for efficient movement throughout the city, while creating clearly defined districts for different types of activity. Public spaces were integrated into the plan from the beginning, ensuring that the growing city would have adequate areas for markets, civic gatherings, and religious ceremonies. The first permanent structures reflected Rome's immediate priorities in this new province. A military fort was established on the higher ground north of the river, providing security for the growing settlement and serving as headquarters for the regional commander. This fort, built according to standardized Roman military architecture, could house a full cohort of troops along with their equipment and supplies. Its commanding position overlooked both the river crossing and the surrounding countryside, allowing Roman forces to respond quickly to any threat while demonstrating Roman power to both allies and potential enemies. Near the river crossing, engineers constructed the first London Bridge, a wooden structure that would be rebuilt and reinforced many times over the coming decades, but which established the crossing point that would remain constant for 2,000 years. This bridge represented a triumph of Roman engineering, spanning the Thames at its narrowest navigable point while allowing ships to pass beneath during high tide. The construction required driving hundreds of wooden piles into the riverbed and building massive stone abutments to support the wooden roadway, a project that employed dozens of skilled craftsmen and hundreds of laborers for months. The bridge's importance extended far beyond its immediate military and commercial functions. It became the focal point around which the entire city developed, determining the location of markets, warehouses, and administrative buildings. The bridge toll, collected from all who crossed, provided revenue for the growing settlement while demonstrating Roman control over this vital transportation route. More symbolically, the bridge represented the Roman ability to impose order on nature, to make the landscape serve human purposes rather than accepting natural limitations. Around these core installations, the city began to take shape with remarkable speed. Roman merchants, attracted by the commercial possibilities of this strategic location, established trading posts and warehouses along the riverfront. These early commercial buildings, constructed of timber with stone foundations, were designed to handle the specific requirements of river trade while providing secure storage for valuable goods. The warehouses, with their thick walls and limited access points, could protect merchandise from both theft and weather while allowing for efficient loading and unloading of river barges and seagoing vessels. Craftsmen and artisans, both Roman citizens and Celtic natives adapting to Roman ways, set up workshops producing everything from pottery and metalwork to leather goods and textiles. These workshops, clustered in specific districts according to Roman urban planning principles, created the specialized neighborhoods that would characterize London's development for centuries to come. The metalworkers established their forges near the river, where they could easily obtain water for cooling and waste disposal, while potters located their kilns on the outskirts where smoke would not disturb residential areas. The famous Roman baths, those centers of social and hygienic life that characterized every proper Roman city, were among the earliest major public works completed in Londinium. These elaborate facilities, fed by springs and heated by sophisticated hypocaust systems, provided not just bathing facilities but social centers where business was conducted and friendships formed. The baths represented Roman civilization at its most refined, combining practical hygiene with architectural beauty and social function in a way that impressed both Roman settlers and Celtic natives. The population of early Londinium was as diverse as the empire itself, creating a cosmopolitan atmosphere that was unique in Britain. Roman citizens, both civilian and retired military, formed the governing class and controlled major commercial enterprises. These Romans brought with them not just administrative skills and commercial connections, but also cultural practices and expectations that would shape the developing city's character. Many were veterans who had served in legions throughout the empire, carrying with them experiences and perspectives from Germania to Syria, from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. Celtic Britons, some voluntarily embracing Roman culture and others compelled by circumstances, provided much of the skilled and unskilled labor that made the city's rapid growth possible. These natives, far from being passive recipients of Roman civilization, actively participated in shaping the hybrid culture that emerged in Londinium. Celtic craftsmen adapted their traditional techniques to Roman requirements, creating distinctive local variants of imperial styles. Celtic merchants used their knowledge of local trade routes and tribal relationships to facilitate commerce between Roman Londinium and the unconquered territories beyond the frontier. Merchants from Gaul brought wine, olive oil, and luxury goods from the Mediterranean, establishing trading houses that would maintain commercial relationships with continental Europe for centuries. These Gallic traders, many of whom had Roman citizenship and extensive experience in provincial commerce, provided the expertise and connections necessary to integrate Londinium into the broader imperial economy. Their presence in the city created a direct link to the sophisticated commercial networks that connected every corner of the Roman world. Traders from Germania supplied amber, furs, and metalwork, while their knowledge of northern European trade routes opened new possibilities for Londinium's merchants. The Germanic traders brought with them not just goods, but also information about markets and opportunities beyond the Roman frontier, intelligence that proved valuable for both commercial and military purposes. Their presence in Londinium demonstrated the city's growing importance as a center for trade that extended far beyond the boundaries of Roman political control. Even exotic goods from the far reaches of the empire, silk from China, spices from India, and precious stones from Africa, began appearing in Londinium's markets, carried by merchants who followed trade routes that spanned continents. These luxury items, though available only to the wealthy, demonstrated Londinium's integration into the global economy of the Roman world and its growing importance as a distribution center for northwestern Europe. The presence of such exotic goods in a city that had been founded only decades earlier testified to the remarkable speed with which Roman commercial networks could integrate new territories into the imperial system. By the year 60 Anno Domini, barely 17 years after its founding, Londinium had grown into the largest city in Roman Britain, with a population approaching 30,000 inhabitants. This rapid growth represented one of the most successful examples of Roman urban development in the western provinces, demonstrating the effectiveness of imperial planning and the attractive power of Roman civilization. The settlement sprawled across both sides of the Thames, connected by an increasingly substantial bridge that could accommodate heavy cart traffic as well as pedestrians. The Forum, that essential center of Roman civic life, had been completed on the highest ground north of the river, surrounded by basilicas, temples, and administrative buildings that proclaimed Londinium's importance within the province. This forum, though smaller than those in Rome or other major imperial cities, was designed according to classical principles and decorated with statues, mosaics, and architectural elements that created a distinctly Roman atmosphere in the heart of Celtic Britain. The Forum served not just as a marketplace but as the political and social center of the growing city, where citizens gathered to hear proclamations, conduct business, and participate in the civic life that Romans considered essential to civilized existence. The basilicas that surrounded the Forum housed the law courts where Roman justice was administered according to imperial legal codes that were gradually replacing Celtic tribal customs throughout the province. These buildings, with their soaring columns and elaborate decorations, impressed both Roman citizens and Celtic natives with the majesty and permanence of imperial authority. The legal proceedings conducted within their walls established precedents and procedures that would influence British law for centuries after the fall of Roman rule. Temples, dedicated to Roman gods and acceptable Celtic deities, demonstrated the religious tolerance that characterized Roman rule while establishing the spiritual framework within which the diverse population could worship. The largest temple, dedicated to Jupiter Optimus Maximus, served as the center of official Roman religious observance, while smaller shrines honored local deities that had been incorporated into the Roman pantheon. This religious syncretism, typical of Roman imperial policy, helped to ease the transition from Celtic to Roman rule while creating new forms of spiritual expression that blended traditions from across the empire. Administrative buildings housed the growing bureaucracy that governed the province, staffed by Roman officials and Celtic nobles who had accepted imperial service. These buildings, though modest compared to their counterparts in Rome or other major cities, represented the extension of imperial administration to the furthest reaches of the known world. The clerks and officials who worked within their walls processed the documents, collected the taxes, and maintained the records that made Roman rule possible while creating the administrative infrastructure that would survive long after the legions departed. The city's rapid growth and prosperity, however, made it a tempting target for those who resented Roman rule. Among the Celtic tribes of eastern Britain, resentment had been building against Roman taxation, land confiscation, and cultural suppression. The initial cooperation that had characterized relations between Romans and many Celtic leaders had gradually given way to suspicion and hostility as the full implications of imperial rule became apparent. Roman demands for tribute labor and military service strained traditional Celtic society, while Roman legal codes and administrative practices undermined the authority of tribal leaders. The spark that ignited this resentment into open rebellion came from an unexpected source, a woman whose name would become legendary throughout British history. Boudica, queen of the Iceni tribe in what is now Norfolk, had initially maintained peaceful relations with Rome following her husband's death. King Prasutagus had been a client king, one of those Celtic rulers who accepted Roman overlordship in exchange for continued authority over their own people. His arrangement with Rome seemed to offer the best of both worlds, preserving Celtic traditions and tribal autonomy while providing access to Roman markets and protection. King Prasutagus had left half his kingdom to his daughters and half to Emperor Nero, hoping this arrangement would protect his people while demonstrating his loyalty to Rome. This division of inheritance, common in Roman law but foreign to Celtic tradition, was intended to satisfy both Roman expectations and tribal customs. Prasutagus believed that by making the emperor his heir, he could ensure Roman protection for his family and people while maintaining some degree of independence for the Iceni tribe. Instead, Roman officials seized the entire kingdom, treating the inheritance as an opportunity to impose direct Roman rule rather than honoring the spirit of Prasutagus's arrangement. The Roman administrators, more concerned with immediate revenue and administrative efficiency than with maintaining the delicate relationships that had made peaceful conquest possible, ignored the rights of Prasutagus's family and the traditional customs of the Iceni people. This seizure represented not just a betrayal of agreements made with a loyal ally, but a fundamental misunderstanding of Celtic society and values. When Boudica protested this violation of her late husband's will and the traditional rights of her people, Roman officials responded with shocking brutality. They publicly flogged the queen, a humiliation that violated every principle of Celtic honor and royal dignity, while her daughters were violated by Roman soldiers in a display of contempt for both Celtic royalty and basic human decency. This brutal treatment of a royal family allied to Rome shocked Celtic Britain and provided the catalyst for the greatest uprising the province would ever witness. Word of Boudica's treatment spread rapidly through the Celtic tribal networks, carried by bards and traders who had witnessed Roman arrogance and brutality firsthand. The story lost nothing in the telling, becoming a symbol of Roman oppression and Celtic resistance that inspired tribes throughout eastern Britain. The violation of a queen and her daughters represented not just personal injury, but an attack on the sacred nature of Celtic kingship and the honor of all Celtic people. The incident demonstrated that Roman promises of protection and partnership were worthless when they conflicted with imperial convenience and administrative efficiency. The Trinovantes tribe, whose capital at Camulodunum had been seized to establish a Roman veteran colony, eagerly joined the rebellion. These people had experienced Roman rule for nearly 2 decades and understood its implications better than tribes that had maintained their independence. The establishment of the veteran colony had displaced thousands of Trinovantes from their ancestral lands, forcing them to accept inferior territory while watching Roman soldiers enjoy the fruits of their former homes. The colony itself, with its temple to the deified Claudius and its arrogant veteran colonists, served as a daily reminder of Celtic subjugation and Roman dominance. Other tribes, inspired by the possibility of driving the invaders back across the sea, began secretly preparing for war while maintaining the appearance of continued loyalty to Rome. The rebellion that emerged was not a spontaneous uprising, but a carefully coordinated effort that involved tribes across eastern Britain. Celtic leaders, using traditional networks of kinship and alliance, created a military coalition that represented the most serious challenge to Roman rule since the initial conquest. The secrecy with which these preparations were conducted demonstrated both the sophistication of Celtic political organization and the depth of resentment against Roman rule. The rebellion began in earnest during the spring of 60 Anno Domini, when Boudica raised her standard and called the tribes to arms. The queen, mounted on her war chariot and accompanied by her violated daughters, became a symbol of Celtic resistance that inspired warriors throughout eastern Britain. Her call to arms appealed not just to tribal loyalty, but to fundamental concepts of honor, justice, and freedom that resonated throughout Celtic society. The rebellion she led represented more than just resistance to Roman rule. It was an attempt to restore Celtic independence and dignity. Her first target was Camulodunum, the former Celtic capital that had been transformed into a showcase of Roman power. The city, with its temple to the deified Claudius and its population of arrogant veteran colonists, represented everything that Celtic Britons had come to hate about Roman rule. The temple itself, funded by forced contributions from Celtic tribes and staffed by priests who celebrated the divinity of their oppressors, was particularly offensive to people whose own religious traditions emphasized the sacred nature of the land and the ancestors who had died defending it. The veteran colonists, grown complacent after years of peaceful rule, were caught completely off guard when thousands of Celtic warriors emerged from the surrounding forests. These Romans, many of whom had served in the legions that conquered Britain, had settled into comfortable retirement supported by the labor and tribute of their former enemies. They had built Roman-style houses, established Roman institutions, and created a miniature version of Mediterranean civilization in the heart of Celtic Britain, apparently oblivious to the resentment their presence generated among the displaced native population. The city fell within days, its inhabitants slaughtered, and its buildings burned to the ground. The destruction was methodical and complete, reflecting not just military victory, but a deliberate attempt to erase every trace of Roman presence from this sacred Celtic site. The temple to Claudius, that hated symbol of Roman domination, was demolished stone by stone while its priests were sacrificed to Celtic gods in rituals that reclaimed the site for its original inhabitants. The veteran colonists, who had enjoyed 2 decades of comfortable retirement at Celtic expense, were killed without mercy in revenge for years of accumulated humiliation and exploitation. News of Camulodunum's destruction reached Londinium within hours, carried by terrified survivors who had escaped the massacre. These refugees brought with them not just news of military defeat, but accounts of Celtic fury that had been building for years beneath the surface of apparent submission. Their stories of systematic destruction and ritual sacrifice demonstrated that this was not merely another tribal raid, but a coordinated uprising aimed at driving Romans from Britain entirely. The refugees' terror was infectious, spreading panic throughout Londinium as residents realized that their prosperity and Roman citizenship provided no protection against Celtic vengeance. Panic spread through the city as residents realized that their prosperity and Roman citizenship provided no protection against Celtic fury. The comfortable assumption that Roman rule was permanent and secure, an assumption that had underlain 2 decades of urban development and commercial growth, suddenly seemed naive and dangerous. Merchants who had invested their fortunes in Londinium's growth, craftsmen who had built their livelihoods on Roman patronage, and administrators who had devoted their careers to imperial service all faced the possibility that their world was about to collapse around them. The Roman governor, Suetonius Paulinus, was campaigning in distant Wales and could not return in time to defend the city. His absence at this critical moment reflected the strategic challenges facing Roman rule in Britain, where limited military resources had to be spread across a vast territory inhabited by hostile tribes. The governor's campaign in Wales, aimed at destroying the Druid stronghold on the island of Anglesey, had seemed more important than maintaining large garrisons in peaceful areas like Londinium. This strategic miscalculation would have catastrophic consequences for the city and its inhabitants. The small garrison left to protect Londinium was hopelessly outnumbered by the approaching Celtic army. These troops, mostly auxiliary units drawn from allied tribes rather than Roman legionaries, faced the impossible task of defending a sprawling city against an enemy that outnumbered them perhaps 50-1. The garrison commander, recognizing the hopelessness of his situation, made the difficult decision to evacuate his forces rather than sacrifice them in a futile defense. This abandonment of Londinium to Celtic vengeance would be remembered as one of the most shameful episodes in the history of Roman Britain. As Boudicca's forces moved south toward Londinium, they were joined by warriors from dozens of tribes who saw this as their opportunity to reclaim their homeland from foreign occupation. The Celtic army that approached London in the early summer of 60 Anno Domini numbered perhaps 80,000 fighters, making it one of the largest military forces ever assembled in ancient Britain. This massive host represented not just military might, but the unified will of Celtic Britain to throw off Roman rule and restore the independence that had been lost 2 decades earlier. They came not just as conquerors, but as liberators determined to erase every trace of Roman presence from their sacred island. The warriors who marched with Boudicca carried with them the accumulated grievances of 20 years of Roman rule, memories of lands seized, taxes imposed, and traditions suppressed. They saw themselves as instruments of divine justice, chosen by their gods to cleanse Britain of foreign contamination and restore the natural order that had existed before the eagles of Rome crossed the Channel. The attack on Londinium was swift and merciless. Celtic warriors poured across the Thames at multiple points, overwhelming the hastily constructed defenses and driving the Roman defenders back into the city center. The assault demonstrated sophisticated military planning, with coordinated attacks at several river crossings preventing any organized Roman resistance. Celtic knowledge of local geography and river conditions, gained through generations of tribal warfare and hunting, proved superior to Roman military engineering when applied to the defense of their homeland. The wooden buildings, constructed according to Roman architectural principles but lacking the stone fortifications of more established cities, proved vulnerable to Celtic fire, arrows, and torches. Within hours, much of the settlement was ablaze, the flames visible for miles across the surrounding countryside. The destruction was systematic and deliberate, reflecting not just military necessity but a conscious effort to obliterate Roman civilization from this strategic location. Every building that represented Roman authority or culture was specifically targeted for destruction. Archaeological evidence discovered centuries later would reveal the true scale of destruction inflicted upon Londinium during Boudicca's rebellion. A thick layer of burned debris, containing melted glass, charred wood, and human remains, marks the level of the early Roman city beneath modern London's foundations. This destruction layer, known to archaeologists as the Boudiccan destruction horizon, provides silent testimony to the ferocity of the Celtic attack and the completeness of the city's destruction. The archaeological record shows that virtually every Roman building in the city was burned, with some areas so thoroughly destroyed that they were never rebuilt. The human cost of Boudicca's assault on Londinium was staggering. Roman historians, writing decades later, claimed that 70,000 Romans and their allies perished during the rebellion, with Londinium accounting for a significant portion of these casualties. Men, women, and children who had made their homes in this thriving commercial center were killed without regard for age or status. The Celtic warriors, driven by years of accumulated grievances against Roman rule, showed no mercy to those they viewed as foreign occupiers and collaborators. The massacre that followed the city's capture was methodical and ritualistic, reflecting Celtic religious beliefs about the need to cleanse the land of foreign contamination. Roman temples were desecrated and their priests sacrificed to Celtic gods in ceremonies that reclaimed the sacred sites for their original inhabitants. Roman citizens were tortured and killed in ways designed to humiliate and terrorize, while their property was destroyed rather than simply seized. This systematic destruction reflected not just military victory, but a spiritual war aimed at erasing Roman civilization from British soil. Yet even as Londinium burned, the seeds of its resurrection were already being planted. Governor Suetonius Paulinus, rushing back from Wales with 2 legions, understood that the loss of Britain's most important commercial center would be a catastrophic blow to Roman prestige and imperial revenues. The destruction of Londinium represented more than just military defeat. It challenged the fundamental assumption of Roman invincibility that underpinned imperial rule throughout the provinces. If Rome could not protect its most important city in Britain, what confidence could other provincial populations have in Roman promises of security and prosperity? Rather than abandon the province to Celtic rule, Paulinus prepared for a decisive battle that would determine whether Roman civilization would survive in Britain. The governor, a veteran of campaigns throughout the empire, understood that military defeat in Britain would have implications far beyond the loss of a single province. Barbarian tribes throughout Europe were watching the British rebellion, looking for signs of Roman weakness that might encourage their own uprisings. The stakes of the coming battle extended far beyond Britain to the security of the entire Western Empire. The confrontation between Roman discipline and Celtic fury took place somewhere in the Midlands, at a location still debated by historians, but remembered as one of the most significant battles in British history. The exact site of this climactic encounter has been lost to history, though archaeological investigations continue to search for evidence of the battlefield where the fate of Roman Britain was decided. What is certain is that the battle represented a clash between 2 fundamentally different approaches to warfare and civilization. Boudicca, riding in her war chariot with her daughters beside her, addressed her vast army with words that have echoed through the centuries. According to Roman historians who recorded her speech, she reminded her warriors that they fought not for conquest or glory, but for the freedom of their children and the honor of their ancestors. Her words appealed to the deepest values of Celtic society, emphasizing the sacred duty to protect the land and people from foreign domination. The Queen's presence on the battlefield, accompanied by her violated daughters, served as a powerful reminder of Roman brutality and the justice of Celtic resistance. The battle itself was a masterpiece of Roman military tactics overcoming seemingly impossible odds. Though outnumbered perhaps 4-1, the Roman legions used their superior discipline, equipment, and tactical flexibility to devastating effect. The Roman formation, carefully chosen and prepared, channeled the Celtic charge into a killing ground where superior Roman armor and weapons could be used to maximum advantage. The legionaries, veterans of campaigns throughout the empire, maintained their formation and discipline even under the most intense pressure. The Celtic charge, which had overwhelmed every Roman force it had previously encountered, broke against the shield wall of seasoned legionaries who had fought from Germania to Syria. The initial impact of thousands of Celtic warriors, screaming their war cries and wielding their long swords, was absorbed by Roman shields and armor designed specifically to withstand such assaults. When the Celtic momentum was exhausted and their formation disrupted, Roman discipline and training began to tell in the close combat that followed. When the Celtic attack faltered, Roman cavalry struck the flanks while auxiliary troops attacked from the rear, turning Celtic courage into catastrophic defeat. The envelopment was perfectly executed, demonstrating the tactical superiority that had made Roman armies masters of the ancient world. The Celtic warriors, brave and individually skilled, found themselves trapped in a tactical situation where their courage could not compensate for superior Roman organization and equipment. The battle became a massacre as organized Celtic resistance collapsed and warriors fled in panic. Boudica herself, rather than face capture and the humiliation of being paraded through Rome in chains, chose death by poison. Her decision to die rather than submit represented the ultimate expression of Celtic values and personal honor, ensuring that she would be remembered as a symbol of resistance rather than defeat. Her body was never found, though legend claims she was buried somewhere in London, perhaps beneath what is now King's Cross Station. The mystery surrounding her final resting place has only added to her legendary status in British history and culture. Her rebellion, though ultimately unsuccessful, had demonstrated that Roman rule in Britain could not be taken for granted, and that the native population possessed both the courage and capability to challenge imperial authority. The uprising had come closer to driving Rome from Britain than any other challenge to imperial rule, revealing weaknesses in Roman administration and military deployment that would influence imperial policy for generations. The rebellion also established a tradition of British resistance to foreign domination that would inspire future generations facing their own struggles for independence. The destruction of Londinium, rather than marking the end of Roman ambitions in Britain, became the catalyst for an even more ambitious reconstruction project. Emperor Nero, determined to demonstrate that Roman power could not be broken by barbarian uprising, authorized massive expenditures for rebuilding the city on a scale that would surpass its previous incarnation. The emperor's response to the rebellion reflected not just practical considerations, but the psychological importance of demonstrating Roman resilience and permanence to both subjects and enemies throughout the empire. This second Londinium would be constructed not just as a commercial center, but as a statement of Roman permanence and cultural superiority. The rebuilding project would incorporate the latest advances in Roman architecture and engineering, creating a city that would serve as a showcase of imperial civilization in the remote northern province. Every aspect of the reconstruction would be designed to demonstrate that Roman rule was not only restored but stronger than ever. The new city that rose from Boudica's ashes incorporated lessons learned from the rebellion's devastation. Instead of the hastily constructed wooden buildings that had characterized early Londinium, Roman architects designed structures of stone and brick that could withstand both fire and assault. The building codes established for the reconstructed city required fire-resistant construction materials and techniques, while the street layout was modified to provide better defensive positions and more efficient movement of military forces during emergencies. The street plan was expanded and regularized, creating broader thoroughfares that could accommodate both commercial traffic and military movements. The main roads were widened to allow rapid deployment of troops, while providing adequate space for the commercial activities that would fund the city's growth. Secondary streets were laid out in a more systematic grid pattern that would facilitate both urban development and defensive operations. The entire street network was designed to channel traffic efficiently while providing multiple routes for evacuation or military response. Public buildings were constructed with an eye toward both functionality and imperial grandeur, creating architectural statements that would impress visitors and residents alike with the majesty of Roman civilization. The Forum of the rebuilt Londinium was among the largest north of the Alps, rivaling those of major continental cities in both size and magnificence. This massive public space, surrounded by colonnades and decorated with statues of emperors and gods, served as the ceremonial heart of the reconstructed city, while providing practical space for markets, legal proceedings, and civic gatherings. Surrounded by basilicas where legal proceedings and commercial transactions took place, temples dedicated to both Roman gods and acceptable local deities, and administrative buildings housing the growing provincial bureaucracy. The Forum became the beating heart of Roman Britain. The basilicas, with their soaring columns and elaborate decorations, housed law courts where Roman justice was administered according to imperial legal codes. These buildings represented the restoration of Roman legal authority after the chaos of the rebellion, while their magnificence demonstrated the permanence and stability of imperial rule. Here, merchants from across the empire negotiated contracts that would shape the economic development of Roman Britain for centuries to come, while provincial governors held court in ceremonies that demonstrated the majesty and authority of imperial administration. Celtic nobles learned to navigate the complexities of Roman law and politics, acquiring the skills necessary to participate in the imperial system while maintaining their positions within their own communities. The Forum became a school of Roman civilization where natives learned the customs and practices that would allow them to prosper under imperial rule. The reconstruction also saw the establishment of Londinium's first stone amphitheater, where gladiatorial contests and public spectacles entertained the growing population while demonstrating Roman cultural values and imperial power. This massive structure, capable of holding thousands of spectators, provided entertainment that was both popular with the masses and politically useful for the authorities. The games held in the amphitheater served multiple purposes, providing recreation for the population, opportunities for political leaders to demonstrate their generosity, and venues for displaying imperial power and Roman cultural superiority. Roman baths, essential to civilized life in the imperial view, were rebuilt on a grander scale, featuring hot and cold pools, exercise areas, and social spaces where business and politics were conducted in the relaxed atmosphere that characterized Roman public life. These elaborate facilities, fed by sophisticated aqueduct systems and heated by advanced hypocaust technology, represented Roman engineering and architecture at their finest. The baths served not just hygienic functions, but social and political purposes, providing venues where people from different backgrounds could meet and conduct business in an atmosphere of civilized leisure. These amenities attracted settlers from across the empire, transforming Londinium into a truly cosmopolitan city that reflected the diversity and sophistication of Roman civilization. Veterans from the legions, merchants from Gaul and Germania, craftsmen from the Mediterranean, and administrators from throughout the empire all found opportunities in the reconstructed city. This influx of settlers brought with them skills, connections, and capital that accelerated Londinium's development while creating the multicultural atmosphere that would characterize the city throughout the Roman period. Perhaps most importantly, the rebuilt Londinium became the center of an extensive road network that connected every corner of Roman Britain to the imperial capital. The famous Roman roads, built to standards that would not be matched for over a millennium after Rome's fall, radiated out from Londinium like spokes of a wheel, carrying not just military traffic and commercial goods, but also the ideas, customs, and cultural practices that gradually transformed Celtic Britain into a Roman province. Watling Street connected the city to the Channel ports and ultimately to Rome itself, providing a direct route for imperial communications, military reinforcements, and commercial traffic. This great highway, built to accommodate heavy military equipment and commercial wagons, remained the primary route between London and the continent for centuries after the fall of Roman rule. The road's construction required massive engineering projects, including bridges over major rivers and causeways through marshlands, demonstrating Roman commitment to permanent control of Britain. Ermine Street ran north toward York and the Scottish frontier, carrying supplies and reinforcements to the legions, defending Britain's northern borders while facilitating trade with unconquered tribes beyond the frontier. This road served as the lifeline for Roman military operations in northern Britain, allowing rapid movement of troops and supplies from the secure base at Londinium to the contested frontiers where Roman expansion continued. The road also facilitated the gradual Romanization of northern Britain by providing a route for merchants, administrators, and settlers moving into newly conquered territories. The Fosseway provided access to the Western Territories and the Welsh borders, connecting Londinium to the mineral wealth of the Western Mountains and the strategic fortresses that controlled the Celtic tribes of Wales. This road network opened up previously inaccessible regions to Roman exploitation while providing secure routes for moving military forces to threatened areas. The construction of these roads represented one of the largest infrastructure projects undertaken in ancient Britain, requiring thousands of workers and massive expenditures of imperial resources. These roads carried not just military traffic and commercial goods, but also the ideas, customs, and cultural practices that gradually transformed Celtic Britain into a Roman province. Along these highways traveled Roman administrators implementing imperial policies, merchants introducing Mediterranean goods and practices, and settlers bringing Roman customs and beliefs to remote corners of the island. The roads served as conduits for Romanization, carrying the cultural influences that would gradually transform British society, even in areas that remained politically independent. Trade flourished in the reconstructed city as never before. The Thames provided access to continental markets, while the road network opened up the entire island to commercial exploitation. British wool, prized throughout the empire for its quality, passed through Londinium's warehouses on its way to Mediterranean textile centers where it was woven into cloth that clothed citizens from Britain to Syria. The wool trade became one of the foundations of Londinium's prosperity, generating the wealth that funded the city's continued expansion and cultural development. Cornish tin, essential for bronze production, was shipped from London's docks to workshops across Europe where it was combined with copper to create the bronze that remained important for tools, weapons, and decorative objects throughout the Roman period. The tin trade connected Londinium to one of the most ancient and valuable industries in Britain, while demonstrating the city's role as a gateway between British resources and continental markets. Control of the tin trade provided substantial revenues for both the imperial government and London's merchant community. British hunting dogs, famous for their skill and loyalty, were exported as luxury items for wealthy Romans who prized them for their hunting abilities and faithful service. These dogs, bred by Celtic tribes for centuries before the Roman conquest, became symbols of British excellence that were sought after throughout the empire. The dog trade, though less economically significant than wool or tin, demonstrated the diverse nature of London's commercial activities and the Roman appreciation for British craftsmanship and natural products. In return, Londinium's markets offered wine from Gaul, olive oil from Spain, silk from China, and spices from India, creating a cosmopolitan commercial environment that rivaled any city in the Western Empire. The variety and quality of goods available in London's markets attracted merchants and customers from throughout Britain and continental Europe, establishing the city's reputation as a center of luxury and sophistication. The presence of exotic goods from the far reaches of the empire demonstrated Londinium's integration into the global economy of the Roman world. The city's population reflected this commercial prosperity and cultural diversity. By the end of the 1st century Anno Domini, Londinium housed perhaps 50,000 inhabitants, making it one of the largest cities in the Western Roman Empire. This population represented a remarkable recovery from the devastation of Boudicca's rebellion, demonstrating both the attractive power of Roman urban civilization and the economic opportunities available in the reconstructed city. The rapid population growth also reflected the success of imperial policies designed to encourage settlement and development in the provinces. Roman citizens formed the governing elite and controlled major commercial enterprises, but they lived alongside Celtic Britons who had adopted Roman customs. Germanic tribesmen serving in auxiliary units, Gallic merchants, and even occasional visitors from the eastern provinces and beyond. This multicultural population created a unique urban culture that blended Roman imperial traditions with local British customs and influences from across the known world. The result was a distinctly British variant of Roman civilization that would influence the island's development long after the legions departed. Celtic artistic motifs appeared in Roman-style mosaics and frescoes, creating hybrid art forms that reflected the cultural fusion taking place throughout Roman Britain. British religious practices were incorporated into Roman temple worship, producing syncretic forms of spirituality that satisfied both Roman requirements and Celtic traditions. Local foods and cooking methods influenced the cuisine served in Roman taverns and private homes, creating distinctive regional variations of Mediterranean culinary traditions. The result was a uniquely British form of Roman culture that preserved elements of pre-conquest traditions while embracing imperial innovations. The 2nd and 3rd centuries Anno Domini marked the golden age of Roman Londinium. The city expanded beyond its original boundaries, spreading along both banks of the Thames and incorporating surrounding settlements into a metropolitan area that rivaled any in the empire. Magnificent public buildings proclaimed Londinium's importance, while private residences displayed the wealth and sophistication of the provincial elite. The city's workshops produced goods that were traded throughout northwestern Europe, while its merchants financed commercial ventures from Scotland to the Sahara. During this period, Londinium also became an important center of learning and culture. Schools established by Roman educators attracted students from across Britain, while libraries and scriptoriums preserved and copied the literary works that formed the foundation of classical education. British scholars made their own contributions to imperial intellectual life, producing histories, poems, and philosophical works that were read and respected throughout the empire. The city's theaters presented both classical Roman dramas and new works that reflected the unique cultural fusion of Roman Britain. The military importance of Londinium continued to grow as well. The city served as the primary supply base for Roman operations in Scotland and Ireland, with its warehouses storing everything from weapons and armor to food and medical supplies. The Thames provided a secure route for moving military equipment and personnel, while the road network allowed rapid deployment of forces to any threatened frontier. Roman military engineers, based in Londinium, designed and supervised the construction of Hadrian's Wall and other frontier fortifications that protected the province from barbarian incursions. Religious life in Roman Londinium reflected the cosmopolitan nature of the population and the tolerant policies of imperial administration. Temples dedicated to Jupiter, Mars, and other members of the Roman pantheon stood alongside shrines honoring Celtic deities like Lugh and Brigantia. Mystery religions from the East, particularly the cult of Mithras popular among soldiers and merchants, established underground temples where initiates participated in secret rituals. Christianity, though initially viewed with suspicion by imperial authorities, gradually gained adherents among both the Roman and British populations. The economic foundation of Londinium's prosperity rested on its position as the gateway between Britain and the continental empire. Every major trade route in Roman Britain either began or ended in the city, making it the natural center for commercial and financial activities. British merchants established the first banking houses north of the Alps, providing credit and currency exchange services for traders operating throughout northwestern Europe. Insurance schemes, pioneered by Londinium's commercial community, protected merchants against the risks of long-distance trade and piracy. The city's craftsmen and manufacturers developed reputations for excellence that extended far beyond Britain's shores. Londinium's metalworkers produced weapons, tools, and decorative objects that were prized throughout the empire. Its textile workers created woolen goods that commanded premium prices in Mediterranean markets. Its potters developed distinctive styles that influenced ceramic production across northwestern Europe. The famous London leather, processed using techniques that combined Roman methods with local innovations, became synonymous with quality and durability. As Roman Londinium reached the height of its prosperity during the 2nd and 3rd centuries, few could have imagined that this magnificent city would one day face challenges that would test the very foundations of imperial rule. The barbarian pressures building along the Rhine and Danube frontiers seemed distant concerns to merchants counting their profits and administrators managing their peaceful province. Yet even in this golden age, subtle changes were beginning that would ultimately transform not just Londinium, but the entire Roman world. The first hints of coming difficulties appeared in the form of increased military expenses and imperial taxation. As barbarian pressure mounted along the continental frontiers, the imperial government demanded ever larger contributions from prosperous provinces like Britain. Londinium's merchants, accustomed to the light taxation that had encouraged their commercial success, found themselves bearing an increasing burden to support military campaigns in distant Germania and Dacia. These financial pressures, though manageable in the short term, began to strain the economic relationships that had made the city's prosperity possible. The transformation of London from its medieval foundations into the magnificent Tudor capital represents one of history's most remarkable urban metamorphoses. When Henry Tudor claimed the English throne as Henry VII in 1485, London stood as England's undisputed commercial and political heart. Yet it remained fundamentally a medieval city, bounded by ancient walls and dominated by the great cathedral of St. Paul's. The early Tudor monarchs would reshape this urban landscape through ambitious building projects, religious reformation, and the cultivation of international trade that would establish London as a European power center rivaling Paris, Rome, and the great cities of the Holy Roman Empire. The London that Henry VII inherited was already ancient beyond measure. Roman Londinium had flourished here for nearly 4 centuries before the legions withdrew, leaving behind roads, walls, and foundations that would shape the city's development for over a millennium. Saxon settlers had rebuilt upon these ruins, creating a trading settlement that gradually evolved into the largest city in medieval England. The Norman conquest had brought stone castles and great churches, while successive kings had granted charters and privileges that made London the unchallenged center of English commerce and governance. Yet despite its antiquity and importance, early Tudor London remained constrained by medieval limitations. The city proper occupied less than a square mile within walls built by the Romans and reinforced by countless generations of inhabitants. Narrow streets twisted between timber-framed houses that leaned precariously over cobbled lanes barely wide enough for a single cart. The Thames, London's lifeline to the sea and the continent beyond, was crossed by only one bridge, the magnificent but overcrowded London Bridge with its shops and houses perched impossibly above the rushing waters below. Henry VII's reign marked the beginning of London's Tudor Renaissance, though the transformation would unfold gradually over more than a century. The new king understood that royal authority required visible demonstration, and he invested heavily in transforming the city's architectural landscape while encouraging the commercial expansion that would fund his dynastic ambitions. The construction of Richmond Palace, though located outside London proper, along the Thames upstream from Westminster, signaled the Tudor commitment to magnificent royal residences that would rival the greatest courts of Europe in splendor and sophistication. Within the city itself, Henry expanded and beautified the Tower of London, adding new residential quarters that transformed the ancient fortress into a suitable royal palace while maintaining its formidable defensive capabilities. The tower had served English kings as fortress, palace, prison, and treasury since William the Conqueror built the Great White Tower in the decades following Hastings. Henry's additions created comfortable apartments where the royal family could reside in security and magnificence, while new gardens and courtyards provided space for the elaborate ceremonies that demonstrated royal power to subjects and foreign visitors alike. The early Tudor period witnessed unprecedented growth in London's merchant community, as Henry VII's policies encouraging international trade brought wealth flowing into the city from across Europe and beyond. The king's pragmatic approach to commerce, which prioritized economic advantage over traditional feudal obligations, created opportunities for ambitious merchants to accumulate fortunes that would have been impossible under earlier monarchs. Italian bankers, following the example of the great Medici houses of Florence, established permanent offices in London, creating financial networks that connected English merchants to the great trading centers of Venice, Florence, and Antwerp. The Hanseatic League, that powerful confederation of northern European trading cities that had dominated Baltic commerce for centuries, maintained its London headquarters in the Steelyard, a complex of warehouses and offices that served as the nerve center for trade in furs, amber, timber, and grain. The German merchants of the Steelyard enjoyed special privileges granted by earlier English kings, including the right to maintain their own courts and customs, making their London establishment virtually a foreign enclave within the English capital. Their presence brought not only commercial opportunities, but also cultural influences that enriched London's increasingly cosmopolitan atmosphere. London's craftsmen and artisans flourished under early Tudor patronage, as royal favor and growing prosperity created unprecedented demand for luxury goods and skilled services. The goldsmiths of Cheapside, organized into one of the city's most prestigious guilds, created works of extraordinary beauty and technical sophistication that attracted admiration from across Europe. Their shops, concentrated along the street that gave them their name, displayed treasures that ranged from delicate jewelry for wealthy merchants' wives to massive ceremonial plates for royal banquets and church services. The city's armorers, concentrated in the area around the Tower of London, where they could serve the royal garrison and visiting nobility, produced plate armor and weapons that combined English steel with Italian design influences, creating a distinctive London style that became highly prized among European nobility. These craftsmen worked with metals imported from across England and the continent, hammering and shaping steel into protective suits that were as much works of art as instruments of war. The finest London armor could turn a sword blade while weighing no more than a heavy winter coat, representing centuries of accumulated knowledge in metallurgy and design. Textile workers in Southwark and in suburbs beyond the city walls developed new techniques for processing imported silk and creating luxury fabrics that competed successfully with the finest products of Flemish and Italian workshops. London's location at the center of England's wool trade gave these craftsmen access to the finest raw materials, while the city's growing wealth created markets for their most expensive products. Silk weavers, many of them immigrants from the Low Countries fleeing religious persecution, brought continental techniques that revolutionized English textile production and established London as a center of luxury fabric manufacturing. The reign of Henry VIII transformed London in ways that would reshape English society permanently, as the young king's accession in 1509 brought a monarch whose appetite for magnificence exceeded even his father's considerable ambitions. Henry's court became a center of European culture and diplomacy, attracting scholars, artists, and ambassadors from across the continent who came to witness the splendor of the English royal household and to participate in the complex diplomatic negotiations that would determine the balance of power in Renaissance Europe. The king's passion for building created a construction boom that employed thousands of London craftsmen and established architectural styles that would influence English building for generations to come. Henry's projects went far beyond mere royal residences, encompassing fortifications, churches, and public buildings that demonstrated the Crown's commitment to London's development as a capital worthy of comparison with Rome, Paris, or Vienna. The scale of royal construction during Henry's reign required new forms of organization and financing that created precedents for later urban development throughout England. Henry VIII's break with Rome beginning in the 1530s precipitated the most dramatic transformation of London's physical and spiritual landscape since the Norman conquest 7 centuries earlier. The dissolution of the monasteries, beginning with the smaller religious houses in 1536 and extending to the great abbeys by 1540, fundamentally altered the city's character in ways that extended far beyond mere changes in religious practice. Ancient institutions that had shaped London life for centuries disappeared virtually overnight, their lands and buildings passing to royal control or being sold to wealthy merchants and courtiers eager to establish themselves as landed proprietors. The impact of monastic dissolution on London cannot be overstated, as religious houses had played central roles in the city's economic, social, and cultural life since Saxon times. Westminster Abbey, though spared destruction due to its royal connections and political importance, lost its monastic community and much of its wealth, transforming from a center of religious learning and charity into essentially a royal chapel. The great Carthusian monastery of the London Charterhouse, where monks had maintained centuries of contemplative life in one of medieval Europe's strictest religious orders, was dissolved and its buildings converted to secular uses that would have horrified its former inhabitants. Smaller religious houses throughout the city met similar fates, their chapels demolished or converted to workshops and warehouses, their libraries scattered to collectors and scholars throughout Europe, their charitable works abandoned or transferred to secular authorities ill-equipped to continue such services. The Augustinian Priory of St. Bartholomew, which had operated London's principal hospital since the 12th century, lost its religious character, though its medical functions continued under royal patronage. Countless smaller establishments, from friaries to nunneries to collegiate churches, simply vanished from London's landscape, leaving only place names and archaeological remains to mark their former existence. Yet this destruction created opportunities for London's expanding population, as former monastic lands became available for development in organized fashion rather than the haphazard growth that had characterized medieval urban expansion. Wealthy merchants, newly enriched by trade with the Americas and the East, purchased dissolved religious properties and converted them into magnificent private residences that created new neighborhoods of unprecedented luxury and sophistication. The transformation of religious buildings into secular uses required architectural innovations that influenced domestic design throughout England for centuries to come. The Charterhouse became the estate of Sir Edward North, who transformed the former monastery into one of London's most impressive private palaces, complete with elaborate gardens that became famous throughout England for their beauty and the exotic plants imported from across the known world. North's gardens included not only traditional English flowers and herbs, but also specimens brought from the Americas, creating botanical collections that advanced scientific understanding while providing spectacular displays for the entertainment of guests and visitors. The religious changes of Henry's reign also transformed London's spiritual life in profound ways that extended far beyond the simple substitution of English for Latin in church services. The establishment of the Church of England created new opportunities for English-born clergy and scholars who had previously found advancement blocked by foreign-born ecclesiastics appointed from Rome. London's parish churches, freed from papal authority, began developing distinctively English forms of worship and church governance that would influence Protestant development throughout Northern Europe and eventually the English-speaking world. Henry VIII's matrimonial adventures brought unprecedented international attention to London as European diplomats and observers flocked to witness the dramatic events unfolding at the English court. The trial of Catherine of Aragon, conducted with all the pomp and ceremony that Henry could devise, attracted representatives from across Catholic Europe who came to witness this unprecedented challenge to papal authority. The rise and fall of Anne Boleyn, her brief reign as queen and dramatic execution, created a sensation that reverberated through every European court and established London as a center of political intrigue and royal drama. The subsequent marriages that followed, each bringing its own diplomatic complications and international ramifications, created a constant stream of diplomatic activity that established London as a major center of European politics comparable to Rome, Paris, or Vienna. Foreign ambassadors maintained permanent residences in the city, creating international communities that brought new cultural influences and commercial connections while transforming London into a truly cosmopolitan capital where multiple languages could be heard in the streets and foreign fashions influenced English dress and manners. The king's passion for entertainment and spectacle transformed London into a stage for royal magnificence that rivaled the greatest courts of Renaissance Europe. The construction of Whitehall Palace, begun on the site of the former residence of Cardinal Wolsey and expanded continuously throughout Henry's reign, created the largest royal palace complex in Europe. With over 1,500 rooms, Whitehall became not just a royal residence but a small city in itself, housing the entire machinery of Tudor government and providing accommodation for the hundreds of courtiers, servants, and officials who served the crown. Royal tournaments and pageants became regular features of London life during Henry's reign, as the king's love of jousting and his need to demonstrate royal magnificence led to the construction of permanent tournament grounds at Greenwich and Westminster, where elaborate contests attracted participants and spectators from across Europe. These events served not merely as entertainment, but as diplomatic occasions where foreign ambassadors could witness English wealth and power, while English nobles demonstrated their martial skills and loyalty to the crown through displays of horsemanship and combat prowess. The economic impact of Henry's court on London was enormous, as the constant presence of wealthy courtiers created demand for luxury goods that stimulated every sector of the city's economy. Goldsmiths, jewelers, tailors, furriers, and countless other craftsmen found ready markets for their finest work among courtiers competing to display their wealth and taste in the elaborate hierarchy of royal favor. The royal household's enormous appetite for food, wine, and other necessities created opportunities for merchants and suppliers throughout the London region, while the king's building projects employed thousands of craftsmen and laborers. Henry's military adventures, particularly his wars with France and Scotland that consumed enormous resources and required constant preparation, brought additional economic benefits to London's expanding industries. The city's armaments industry expanded dramatically to supply royal armies with weapons, armor, and artillery, while its shipbuilding yards constructed warships that would form the foundation of England's future naval supremacy. London merchants invested heavily in royal loans, receiving in return trading privileges and monopolies that further enhanced their prosperity, while binding their interests closely to the crown's success. The reign of Edward VI, though brief due to the young king's early death, continued the religious transformation begun by his father while introducing new elements of continental Protestant reform that would permanently shape English Christianity. The Regency governments, first under the Duke of Somerset and later the Duke of Northumberland, pursued religious policies that went far beyond Henry VIII's break with Rome, introducing continental Protestant ideas and practices that transformed English worship and theology in ways that would influence English-speaking Christianity for centuries to come. London became the center of English Protestant reform during Edward's reign, as the capital's strategic importance and concentration of educated clergy made it the natural headquarters for religious innovation. Foreign Protestant reformers, including Martin Bucer from Strasbourg and Peter Martyr from Italy, established residence in the city and influenced the development of English Protestant doctrine through their teaching and writing. These scholars brought continental theological sophistication that elevated English Protestant intellectual life while creating connections between English reformers and their counterparts throughout Protestant Europe. The publication of the Book of Common Prayer in 1549 created a standardized form of English worship that replaced the Latin Mass throughout the realm, while London's expanding printing industry produced Protestant literature that spread Reformed ideas throughout England and beyond. The city's printers, many of them immigrants from the Low Countries where printing had first developed, created a publishing industry that would make London one of Europe's major centers of book production and intellectual exchange. The brief reign of Mary Tudor brought dramatic reversals that tested London's religious loyalties and demonstrated the deep divisions that religious change had created in English society. The Queen's determination to restore Catholic worship and papal authority created tensions that divided London society along religious lines, as families and communities found themselves split between those who welcomed the return of traditional religion and those who had embraced Protestant reform. The burning of Protestant heretics at Smithfield, including prominent reformers like John Rogers and John Hooper, created martyrs whose memory would influence English Protestant identity for centuries to come. Yet even during Mary's Catholic restoration, London's commercial life continued to flourish as the city's merchants demonstrated the pragmatic adaptability that had characterized London business for centuries. The Queen's marriage, II Philip of Spain brought new trading opportunities with Spanish territories in the Americas and Europe, while her government's need for funds to support religious restoration and military campaigns created opportunities for London's financial community to profit from royal borrowing. The city's merchants, whatever their private religious beliefs, adapted pragmatically to changing political circumstances while maintaining the commercial relationships that sustained their prosperity. The accession of Elizabeth I in 1558 marked the beginning of London's Golden Age, as the new queen combined her father's love of magnificence with a shrewd understanding of statecraft that would make England a major European power while establishing London as one of the continent's greatest cities. Elizabeth's long reign provided the stability necessary for sustained economic growth, while her court became a center of Renaissance culture that attracted talent from throughout Europe and established English literature, music, and drama as forces in European civilization. Elizabeth's London was a city of extraordinary contrasts and boundless energy that reflected the dynamic changes transforming English society during the late 16th century. Within the ancient walls, merchants conducted business in dozens of languages, while craftsmen created goods that competed successfully in markets from Moscow to Morocco. The Thames teemed with shipping that brought exotic goods from every corner of the known world, from Chinese silk and Indian spices to American silver and African ivory, while the city's growing population created demand for housing, food, and services that stimulated economic activity throughout southeastern England. The Elizabethan court became legendary for its sophistication and cultural achievements, as the Queen's love of music, poetry, and drama created a flowering of English culture that would influence European civilization for centuries. Elizabeth's own education, which included Latin, Greek, French, Italian, and Spanish, reflected the Renaissance ideal of learned monarchy, while her court attracted scholars, poets, and artists who created works that established English as a major European literary language. The construction of permanent theaters like the Theatre and the Curtain in Shoreditch, followed later by the Globe and the Rose on the South Bank, established London as Europe's dramatic capital and provided venues for the works of Christopher Marlowe, William Shakespeare, and their contemporaries. Elizabeth's religious settlement created a distinctively English form of Protestantism that avoided the extremes of continental reform while maintaining independence from papal authority, establishing a via media that would become the foundation of Anglican Christianity. London's churches developed liturgical practices and architectural styles that reflected this moderate approach, creating worship spaces that combined Protestant theology with traditional English architectural forms. The Queen's own religious moderation encouraged tolerance that allowed London to accommodate diverse religious viewpoints while maintaining overall unity necessary for effective governance. The defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 marked England's emergence as a major naval power and established London as the center of an expanding maritime empire that would eventually span the globe. The victory brought enormous prestige to Elizabeth's government while demonstrating English naval capabilities that would support the commercial expansion of subsequent decades. London shipbuilders, concentrated in yards along the Thames from Deptford to Blackwall, developed new vessel designs that combined speed with cargo capacity, creating ships ideally suited for long-distance trade and exploration in an age when maritime technology determined commercial success. The late Elizabethan period witnessed the beginning of English overseas expansion that would ultimately create the largest empire in human history, as London merchants and investors financed voyages of exploration and trade that established English presence in every inhabited continent. The establishment of trading companies like the Muscovy Company, which opened trade with Russia through the Arctic Ocean, the Eastland Company, which developed commerce with the Baltic region, and the Levant Company, which established English trading posts in the Ottoman Empire, created new commercial networks that brought unprecedented wealth to London merchants while establishing English trading posts from Russia to the Eastern Mediterranean. These ventures required sophisticated financial arrangements that stimulated the development of London's banking and insurance industries, as merchants needed new methods for raising capital, managing risks, and transferring funds across vast distances. The Joint Stock Company, a revolutionary form of business organization that allowed multiple investors to pool resources while limiting individual liability, emerged from the practical needs of long-distance trade and would eventually transform commercial organization throughout the world. The founding of the East India Company in 1600 represented the culmination of Elizabethan commercial ambition and the beginning of English expansion into Asia. This joint stock company, chartered by the Queen with exclusive rights to trade with the East Indies, would eventually control much of the Indian subcontinent while generating enormous profits for its London shareholders. The company's headquarters in Lidenhall Street became the nerve center of English trade with Asia, while its ships, built in London yards and manned by London sailors, carried English goods to markets that had previously been dominated by Portuguese and Dutch merchants. London's population grew dramatically during the Tudor period, expanding from perhaps 50,000 inhabitants at the beginning of Henry VII's reign to over 200,000 by Elizabeth's death in 1603. This growth created enormous challenges for city authorities while generating economic opportunities that attracted migrants from throughout England and beyond. The city's ancient infrastructure, designed for a much smaller population, struggled to accommodate this expansion, leading to overcrowding, sanitation problems, and periodic outbreaks of plague that reminded Londoners of their vulnerability to epidemic disease. Yet the city's growth also demonstrated its extraordinary vitality and economic success, as people voted with their feet for London's opportunities over the limited prospects available in rural England. New suburbs developed beyond the ancient walls, creating distinct neighborhoods with their own commercial centers and social institutions. Southwark, across the Thames from the city proper, became a thriving community of craftsmen, entertainers, and traders who served London's growing population while maintaining their own civic identity separate from the ancient city of London. Westminster, seat of royal government and site of the ancient abbey where English kings had been crowned since the Norman conquest, developed into a separate city that rivaled London in wealth and importance. The presence of the royal court and the growing machinery of Tudor government created demand for housing and services that transformed Westminster from a monastic settlement into a major urban center. While the construction of great houses for nobles and courtiers established new standards of domestic architecture that influenced building throughout England, the early 17th century brought new challenges and opportunities as London adapted to the union of the English and Scottish crowns under James I, the first Stuart king. The new monarch's Scottish background and his attempts to create a unified British kingdom created tensions that would eventually lead to civil war, but also opened new possibilities for trade and cultural exchange between England and Scotland. London's position as the capital of the newly united kingdom enhanced its importance while creating new administrative challenges. The Gunpowder Plot of 1605, Guy Fawkes' failed attempt to blow up Parliament and kill the king, demonstrated both London's vulnerability to terrorist attack and the government's growing sophistication in intelligence gathering and security measures. The plot's discovery and the subsequent trials and executions created a sensation that reinforced Protestant identity while establishing precedents for state security that would influence English governance for centuries. The early Stuart period also witnessed significant developments in London's intellectual and cultural life, as the city became a center of scientific inquiry and philosophical speculation that would contribute to the scientific revolution. The Royal College of Physicians, established in the early 16th century, became a center of medical research and education that advanced understanding of human anatomy and disease. London's physicians, including William Harvey, who discovered the circulation of blood, made contributions to medical knowledge that influenced practice throughout Europe. The English Civil War of the 1640s brought unprecedented challenges to London as the city found itself at the center of the conflict between King Charles I and Parliament. London's support for Parliament proved decisive in the war's outcome, as the city's wealth and population provided resources that enabled parliamentary forces to sustain their military efforts over several years of costly campaigning. The execution of Charles I in 1649, carried out in front of Whitehall Palace before crowds of London spectators, marked one of the most dramatic moments in English history and established precedents for constitutional monarchy that would influence political development throughout the English-speaking world. The Commonwealth period under Oliver Cromwell brought significant changes to London's social and cultural life, as Puritan religious beliefs influenced everything from theatre and music to dress and social customs. The closure of London's theatres, which Puritans considered immoral, eliminated one of the city's most distinctive cultural institutions, though it also encouraged the development of other forms of entertainment and artistic expression. The period's emphasis on religious devotion and moral reform created a more sober atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the exuberance of Elizabethan and early Stuart London. The restoration of the monarchy in 1660 under Charles II brought a reaction against Puritan restraints that created one of the most colorful periods in London's cultural history. The reopening of the theatres, now featuring actresses for the first time in English dramatic history, created new forms of entertainment that attracted audiences from across English society. The King's Court, influenced by French fashions and continental sophistication acquired during years of exile, established new standards of elegance and refinement that influenced London society for generations. The Great Fire of London in September 1666 represented both catastrophe and opportunity for the city that had grown continuously since Roman times. The fire, which began in Thomas Farriner's bakery on Pudding Lane and spread rapidly through the closely packed medieval streets, destroyed over 13,000 houses, 87 churches, and most of the ancient city's commercial infrastructure. The destruction was so complete that contemporary observers described it as the end of an era, the final disappearance of medieval London that had survived plague, war, and religious upheaval for over 1,000 years. Yet this destruction created an unprecedented opportunity for urban renewal that would transform London into a modern metropolis designed according to contemporary principles of city planning and fire prevention. Sir Christopher Wren, the brilliant architect and scientist who was appointed to oversee the reconstruction, prepared ambitious plans for a completely new city layout with wide streets, open squares, and improved drainage that would have created one of Europe's most beautiful capitals. Though financial constraints and property disputes prevented the full implementation of Wren's grand design, the reconstruction did create significant improvements in street layout and building standards. Sir Christopher Wren's rebuilding of London's churches following the Great Fire created an architectural legacy that would define the city's skyline for centuries and establish Wren as one of England's greatest architects. Wren's masterpiece, the new St. Paul's Cathedral, rose from the ashes of the medieval structure to become one of Europe's greatest Baroque buildings. Its massive dome dominating London's skyline and serving as a symbol of the city's resilience and ambition. The cathedral's construction, which took over 30 years to complete, required innovations in engineering and construction that advanced architectural knowledge throughout Europe. The 51 parish churches that Wren designed throughout the city created a network of architectural gems that demonstrated English Baroque style at its finest, each building adapted to its specific site while contributing to the overall harmony of the rebuilt city. Wren's churches, with their elegant spires and sophisticated interiors, established new standards for religious architecture that influenced church building throughout the English-speaking world. The variety of Wren's designs, from the simple elegance of St. Mary, Lee, Bow to the complex geometry of St. Stephen Walbrook, demonstrated the architect's extraordinary creativity and technical mastery. The post-fire rebuilding also established new standards for urban planning that would influence city development throughout the English-speaking world and beyond. The new building regulations required brick or stone construction, wider streets, and improved sanitation systems that reduced fire risk while creating healthier living conditions for London's growing population. The reconstruction of the Royal Exchange, the Guildhall, and other major civic buildings demonstrated London's determination to rebuild on a scale that would surpass the pre-fire city in both magnificence and functionality. The late 17th and early 18th centuries witnessed London's emergence as Europe's largest city and the center of an expanding global empire that would dominate world affairs for the next 2 centuries. The union with Scotland in 1707 created the Kingdom of Great Britain and established London as the capital of a unified realm that combined English commercial expertise with Scottish intellectual vigor and military tradition. The city's financial institutions, particularly the newly established Bank of England founded in 1694, developed sophisticated methods for financing government operations and commercial ventures that would make London the world's financial capital. The South Sea Bubble of 1720, though it ended in financial disaster for many investors, demonstrated London's central role in international finance and the growing sophistication of English capital markets. The crisis, caused by speculation in the stock of the South Sea Company, affected investors throughout Europe and established precedents for financial regulation that would influence banking practice for centuries. London's recovery from the bubble's collapse demonstrated the resilience of English financial institutions and the underlying strength of the British economy. The Industrial Revolution transformed London from a commercial and administrative center into the heart of the world's first industrial economy, as new technologies and methods of production revolutionized manufacturing while creating unprecedented opportunities for economic growth. The city's strategic location at the center of Britain's transportation network made it the natural focal point for the distribution of manufactured goods produced in the new industrial cities of Manchester, Birmingham, and Sheffield. London's port facilities expanded dramatically to accommodate the growing volume of trade, while new docks and warehouses created employment for thousands of workers who migrated to the city from rural areas throughout Britain and Ireland. The expansion of London's manufacturing sector during the 18th and early 19th centuries created new forms of industrial organization that would influence economic development worldwide. The city's craftsmen adapted traditional skills to new technologies, creating industries that combined hand production with mechanical innovation in ways that maximized both quality and efficiency. London's furniture makers, for example, developed assembly line techniques that allowed them to produce high-quality goods at prices that made them accessible to the growing middle class, while maintaining standards of craftsmanship that preserved the city's reputation for excellence. The growth of London's financial sector during this period established the city as the center of international commerce and investment, as English merchants and bankers developed new methods for financing trade and industrial development. The London Stock Exchange, formally established in 1701, though trading had occurred informally for decades, became the world's largest securities market, providing capital for industrial development throughout Britain and its expanding empire. London's insurance companies, led by Lloyd's of London, which had grown from a coffee house where merchants met to arrange maritime insurance, developed new methods for assessing and managing commercial risks that made possible the complex international trade networks of the industrial age. Victorian London represented the apotheosis of urban civilization, a metropolis of unprecedented size and complexity that served as the administrative center of an empire spanning a quarter of the globe while pioneering new forms of urban organization and public service. The accession of Queen Victoria in 1837 coincided with London's emergence as the world's largest city, with a population exceeding 1 million inhabitants and growing rapidly as migrants flocked to the capital, seeking employment in its expanding industries and service sectors. The Victorian transformation of London involved massive infrastructure projects that created the foundation for modern urban life, while demonstrating the potential of organized public investment in urban improvement. The construction of an integrated railway network connecting London to every major city in Britain revolutionized transportation while establishing the capital as the hub of national communications. The great railway terminals, including King's Cross, Paddington, and Victoria, became architectural monuments that celebrated the age of steam, while providing efficient facilities for the millions of passengers who traveled to and from the capital each year. The development of London's underground railway system, beginning with the Metropolitan Railway in 1863, represented a revolutionary approach to urban transportation that would be copied in cities throughout the world. The construction of underground tunnels through London's complex geology required engineering innovations that pushed the boundaries of Victorian technology, while the operation of steam trains in enclosed spaces created unique challenges that led to the development of new safety systems and ventilation techniques. The success of London's underground system demonstrated the feasibility of subterranean transportation and established precedents that would influence urban planning throughout the industrial world. London's water supply and sewerage systems underwent complete reconstruction during the Victorian period, creating public health infrastructure that would serve as a model for urban development worldwide, while dramatically improving living conditions for millions of inhabitants. The Great Stink of 1858, when untreated sewage contaminated the Thames and created a public health crisis that affected even the Houses of Parliament, prompted the construction of an integrated sewerage system designed by Sir Joseph Bazalgette that eliminated cholera and dramatically reduced mortality rates throughout the metropolitan area. Bazalgette's sewerage system, one of the greatest engineering achievements of the Victorian age, required the construction of over 1,000 miles of sewers that carried London's waste to treatment plants downstream from the city. The project's success in eliminating waterborne diseases demonstrated the importance of public health infrastructure while establishing principles of urban sanitation that would influence city planning throughout the world. The Thames embankment, built as part of the sewerage project, created new riverside parks and roadways that enhanced London's beauty while providing essential infrastructure for the growing metropolis. The Victorian period also witnessed the creation of London's great museums and cultural institutions that established the city as a center of learning and artistic achievement rivaling any in the world. The British Museum, expanded and rebuilt during this period with its magnificent reading room designed by Sidney Smirke, became the world's largest repository of human cultural achievement, housing collections that spanned every civilization and historical period. The museum's library, which served as Britain's national library until the late 20th century, attracted scholars from throughout the world while supporting research that advanced human knowledge in countless fields. The Victoria and Albert Museum, the Natural History Museum, and the Science Museum created a complex of educational institutions in South Kensington that attracted scholars and visitors from throughout the world while demonstrating Britain's commitment to education and cultural advancement. These institutions, built with profits from the Great Exhibition of 1851, established new standards for museum design and public education that would influence cultural institutions throughout the English-speaking world and beyond. London's role as the capital of the British Empire brought unprecedented wealth and international influence while creating a cosmopolitan atmosphere that made the city a magnet for talent from throughout the world. The city's financial district, centered in the ancient city of London, managed the complex financial arrangements that supported imperial trade and administration, while its shipping industry handled the enormous volume of goods that flowed between Britain and its overseas territories. The Port of London, expanded through a series of new docks built throughout the 19th century, became the world's largest port, handling ships from every corner of the globe while employing hundreds of thousands of workers in related industries. The late Victorian and Edwardian period saw London reach the peak of its global influence as the center of the world's largest empire and most advanced industrial economy. The city's population exceeded 6 million inhabitants by 1900, making it by far the world's largest urban area, while its port handled more shipping than any other in the world. London's financial institutions managed investments throughout the globe, while its manufacturing industries supplied goods to markets from Canada to Australia to India, creating an integrated global economy centered on the Thames. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 marked the beginning of London's transformation from imperial capital to modern international city, as the conflict brought unprecedented challenges while demonstrating the city's central role in global affairs. The war brought unprecedented challenges as German bombing attacks, first by Zeppelin airships and later by Gotha aircraft, introduced Londoners to the realities of modern warfare and the vulnerability of civilian populations to aerial attack. Yet the city's response to these challenges demonstrated the resilience and adaptability that had characterized its development for nearly 2 millennia. London's role in coordinating the Allied war effort established new patterns of international cooperation that would influence global politics throughout the 20th century and beyond. The city became the meeting place for Allied leaders and the headquarters for joint military planning that would ultimately achieve victory over the Central Powers. The experience of managing a global war from London created administrative and communication systems that would prove invaluable in subsequent international crises while establishing London's role as a center of international diplomacy and cooperation. The interwar period brought significant challenges as London adapted to changed economic circumstances and Britain's reduced international position following the enormous costs of the Great War. The decline of traditional industries and the loss of overseas markets created unemployment and social tensions that tested the city's social fabric, while the rise of new technologies and forms of entertainment created opportunities for cultural innovation and economic diversification that would reshape London's economy and society. The development of London as a center of broadcasting and film production during the 1920s and 30s established new industries that would become increasingly important in the post-war period and beyond. The British Broadcasting Corporation, established in 1922 with headquarters in Broadcasting House, created the world's first national radio service and later pioneered television broadcasting, establishing standards for public service broadcasting that would influence media development throughout the English-speaking world. The city's film studios, including those at Ealing and Elstree, produced movies that competed successfully with Hollywood productions in international markets while establishing distinctively British approaches to cinema. World War II brought London face to face with the most severe challenges in its long history, as the city became a primary target for German bombing campaigns designed to break British morale and force the country out of the war. The Blitz, the sustained German bombing campaign that began in September 1940 and continued intermittently until May 1941, tested the city's ability to function under conditions of unprecedented destruction, while creating a legend of civilian courage that would inspire resistance movements throughout occupied Europe. Yet London's response to the Blitz demonstrated the courage and determination that would make the city a symbol of resistance to tyranny throughout the free world. The famous images of St. Paul's Cathedral surviving the flames that surrounded it became symbols of British determination to continue fighting regardless of the cost, while the stoicism of ordinary Londoners sheltering in underground stations demonstrated the civilian heroism that would prove as important as military valor in achieving ultimate victory. The destruction caused by German bombing created opportunities for post-war reconstruction that would transform London's physical appearance and social structure in ways that addressed long-standing urban problems while creating new possibilities for urban development. The rebuilding of the City of London created a modern financial district that combined historical preservation with contemporary architectural innovation, while the construction of new housing estates replaced slum areas with modern residential developments that provided improved living conditions for working-class families who had endured substandard housing for generations. The establishment of the National Health Service in 1948, with its headquarters in London, created a new model of public health care that would influence social policy throughout the world while demonstrating the potential of comprehensive public services. London's great teaching hospitals, including Guy's, St. Bartholomew's, and the London Hospital, became centers of medical research and training that advanced the frontiers of medical knowledge while providing healthcare services to millions of patients regardless of their ability to pay. The 1960s witnessed London's emergence as a global center of popular culture and fashion that would influence youth culture throughout the world and establish new forms of cultural expression that challenged traditional social conventions. The city's music scene, centered in clubs and recording studios throughout the metropolitan area, produced bands like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and countless others who revolutionized popular music and established London as the creative capital of the English-speaking world. The Cultural Revolution of the 60s transformed London from a somewhat staid imperial capital into a dynamic center of youth culture and artistic innovation. London's fashion industry during this period created styles that challenged traditional concepts of dress and personal expression, while establishing the city as a center of creative innovation that rivaled Paris and Milan in international influence. The boutiques of Carnaby Street and the King's Road became pilgrimage destinations for young people from throughout the world. While London designers like Mary Quant and Vivienne Westwood created fashions that influenced clothing design for generations and established new relationships between fashion, music, and youth culture. The transformation of London's economy during the late 20th century reflected broader changes in the global economy as traditional manufacturing gave way to service industries and financial services that required different skills and created new forms of employment. The deregulation of financial markets in the 1980s, known as the Big Bang, established London as the world's leading international financial center, attracting banks and investment firms from throughout the world while creating employment opportunities for highly skilled professionals in finance, law, and related services. The development of Canary Wharf as a second financial district during the 1980s and 90s demonstrated London's ability to adapt to changing economic circumstances while maintaining its position as a global financial capital. The construction of new office towers in the former London Docklands created a modern business district that complemented the traditional City of London while providing space for the expanding financial services industry and the new technologies that were transforming international commerce. London's successful hosting of the 2012 Olympic Games demonstrated the city's continued ability to organize major international events while showcasing its cultural diversity and creative achievements to a global audience of billions. The Games brought together athletes from throughout the world while highlighting London's role as a multicultural metropolis that welcomes people from every corner of the globe and creates opportunities for cultural exchange and mutual understanding. Today's London stands as one of the world's great global cities, a metropolis of over 9 million inhabitants that serves as a center of international finance, culture, and politics while maintaining its position as one of the world's most important urban centers. The city's ability to combine respect for its historical heritage with openness to innovation and change has enabled it to maintain its position as one of the world's most important urban centers while adapting successfully to the challenges of the 21st century. From climate change to technological disruption to changing patterns of international trade and communication. The story of London's development from Roman Londinium to modern global metropolis represents one of history's most remarkable examples of urban continuity and adaptation, demonstrating how cities can survive and thrive through centuries of change while maintaining their essential character and continuing to serve as centers of human civilization. Through conquest and plague, fire and bombing, economic transformation and social change, the city has demonstrated an extraordinary capacity for renewal and growth that has enabled it to remain at the forefront of human civilization for nearly 2,000 years, adapting to each new challenge while preserving the essential qualities that have made it one of the world's great cities. As London faces the challenges and opportunities of the future, from Brexit to climate change to technological revolution, its long history provides both inspiration and guidance for continued success as one of the world's great cities. The lessons learned through 2 millennia of urban development, from Roman engineering to medieval commerce to industrial innovation to modern finance, offer valuable insights for addressing contemporary challenges while maintaining the dynamic spirit that has made London a beacon of human achievement and a model for urban civilization throughout the world. The Thames continues to serve as London's lifeline, its waters carrying not only commercial vessels and tourist boats, but also the dreams and aspirations of millions who call this great city home. Along its banks, the juxtaposition of ancient and modern creates a visual narrative that speaks to London's ability to honor its past while embracing its future. The Tower of London stands sentinel over centuries of history, while the gleaming towers of Canary Wharf pierce the sky with their promise of tomorrow's possibilities. In the boroughs that spread across London's vast expanse, communities maintain their distinct identities while contributing to the city's collective strength. From the artistic enclaves of Shoreditch to the leafy suburbs of Richmond, each area offers its own interpretation of what it means to be part of London's grand tapestry. The markets of Camden Lock buzz with creative energy, while the quiet squares of Bloomsbury provide sanctuary for contemplation and learning. London's educational institutions continue to shape minds and futures, with universities and colleges drawing students from every corner of the globe. The British Museum, with its vast collections spanning human civilization, serves as a testament to humanity's shared heritage and London's role as a keeper of knowledge. The National Gallery and Tate Modern showcase artistic achievements that inspire and challenge visitors to see the world through different perspectives. The city's transportation network, from the iconic red double-decker buses to the extensive underground system, facilitates the daily movement of millions while serving as symbols of London's ingenuity and practicality. The recently completed Crossrail project demonstrates the city's commitment to infrastructure investment that will serve future generations while addressing current needs. London's parks and green spaces provide essential breathing room in the urban environment, offering residents and visitors alike the opportunity to connect with nature without leaving the city. Hyde Park's Speaker's Corner remains a symbol of free expression, while Regent's Park's Rose Gardens provide beauty and tranquility in the heart of the metropolis. The culinary landscape of London reflects its multicultural population, with restaurants, markets, and food halls offering authentic tastes from around the world. Borough Market stands as one of the oldest and largest food markets in London, showcasing the best of British produce alongside international delicacies that reflect the city's global connections. London's theaters continue to set standards for dramatic excellence, with the West End serving as a global destination for theatrical entertainment. From long-running musicals to cutting-edge experimental productions, the city's stages provide platforms for artistic expression that enriches cultural life and contributes significantly to the economy. The financial district, known as the City of London, maintains its position as a global financial center, adapting to changing international conditions while preserving its role as a hub for innovation in banking, insurance, and investment services. The nearby developments in Canary Wharf have expanded London's financial capacity while creating new architectural landmarks that define the modern skyline. London's commitment to sustainability and environmental responsibility is evident in numerous initiatives aimed at reducing carbon emissions, improving air quality, and creating a more livable urban environment. The introduction of the ultra-low emission zone and investments in electric public transportation demonstrate the city's dedication to addressing climate change while maintaining economic vitality. The royal parks and palaces that dot London's landscape serve as reminders of the city's royal heritage while providing public spaces for recreation and reflection. Buckingham Palace, Westminster Abbey, and the Tower of London attract millions of visitors annually, contributing to the tourism industry while preserving important historical sites for future generations. London's neighborhoods each tell their own stories, from the Victorian terraces of Notting Hill to the Georgian squares of Marylebone. These residential areas provide the human scale that makes London livable despite its size, creating communities within the larger urban framework where people can build meaningful lives and relationships. The River Thames, flowing through the heart of London, serves as both a practical waterway and a symbolic thread connecting the city's past, present, and future. The bridges that span its waters, from the medieval London Bridge to the modern Millennium Bridge, represent different eras of engineering achievement, while facilitating the daily life of the city. London's markets, from the famous Portobello Road to the historic Leadenhall Market, provide spaces for commerce, social interaction, and cultural exchange. These venues preserve traditional ways of doing business while adapting to contemporary needs and expectations. The city's commitment to public health and social services ensures that London remains a place where people can thrive regardless of their background or circumstances. The National Health Service, with its network of hospitals and clinics throughout London, provides healthcare access that serves as a model for urban health systems worldwide. London's future depends on its ability to balance growth with livability, innovation with tradition, and global connectivity with local community needs. The challenges facing the city in the 21st century require the same spirit of adaptation and resilience that has characterized London throughout its long history. As London continues to evolve, it remains a city where the past informs the present and the present shapes the future, creating an urban environment that serves as both a home for its residents and a destination for the world.